in terms of your personal and professional journey to becoming a neuropsychologist and working in the field that you're currently in. Could you tell me a little bit about why you chose brain injury? How did you end up working in this field?
Well, I guess I sort of accidentally fell into it, really. So my first job was in a general hospital where there was a variety of different neurological wards, and I was told brain injury is where you're starting, so that's where I started. And but it was just so fascinating, and just having these patients who had these clear difficulties with social communication, and we had no way to analyse it or work it out. I remember one time this hospital, as you know, was a very large hospital where we would often drive from one ward to another.
Yes.
And I remember picking up one of the brain injury patients from his ward because he was coming across to my psychology department to be tested, and he just happily got in the car and he chatted all the way over to the ward, and then he kept chatting, and then he sat down in the chair and he's still chatting, and then he finally said, "So why am I here?" And I think it's that kind of really just didn't, he wasn't aware of, wasn't able to kind of communicate with me to sort of find out what was going on, or what was expected of him. And it was that kind of behaviour. I mean, he was a very bright man, and he went back to work, but he continued to sort of have these social skills changes that we really couldn't pin down, and and sort of giving him the Ray figure just to copy, or the waist just wasn't picking it up. So that's how I got really.
So it's a challenge just getting your head around.
Yeah, trying to work
how
out
to deal with it.
That's right. How to work out what was going on with him. So that's what led me into it.
So then what led you, because obviously you were working as a clinician then, but then you went on to do a higher degree.
Yes.
And, you went on to do your PhD. So what particularly drove you to take that extra step of really wanting to get into this in more depth?
Well, I loved research, but it was that intriguing problem about how we had no tools. I mean, there was this fellow chatting away. His social life was a mess because people didn't really want to interact with him. And I had nothing. I could hold up a picture of an apple and say, "What is this?" and he'd go, "It's an apple." And it wasn't getting me anywhere close to the kinds of difficulties he was having. So it was trying to, and I felt like I was wandering around this ball of string trying to find the end and unravel it. And I finally kind of figured it out during my PhD. Yeah.
So in terms of the work that you've done, you've had a huge impact on the whole field of social cognition. You're a world leader. Who were the influences for you in your career, in your thinking?
Well, I have to say it was Luria, Alexander Luria. I just, obviously, Russian, died in the 70s, but his work is just astounding. And the working brain, that he just described, and he was interested in linguistics, and he was interested in so many things. And the other thing that's really interesting about his work is that the working brain, which I still have on my bookshelf, translated in 1973, described experiments in the Russian literature that we are now replicating in my lab. And they have never seen the light of day in the English literature. He was so ahead of his time. So things like psychophysiology, skin conductance, eye tracking, he was doing all of that back in the 60s.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is, it's amazing. And just such a huge, huge breadth of thought and ideas. Really the founder of modern neuropsychology, but broader than the neuropsychology that I think is currently practiced. He was really looking at a lot of these very experimental procedures long before we even thought about it.
So in terms of, we've talked about traumatic brain injury, do you have other interests outside of traumatic brain injury?
Yes. Well, I mean, traumatic brain injury is certainly my home, but this problem with social cognition, I mean, it transpires that it's common to all sorts of different disorders, as I mentioned, frontotemporal dementia, stroke, right hemisphere stroke, especially, but also developmental disorders, autism spectrum disorders, schizophrenia. So, my team, we're sort of broadening our interest into these other groups because it's equally relevant there. So, and then even, psychopathy, so all sorts of disorders that are sort of fundamentally pivoted on this failure to empathise or share experiences with other people. So it's, it's very rich.
And you also talked about, the use of technology and evoked potentials, and that's kind of a new direction, isn't it?
That's right. So, we're using a lot of sort of psychophysiological measures like EEG, ERP, but to measure electrical brain activity. But also something that I think has been neglected, which is the body's response to emotional events. So whether our heart rate changes or our arousal levels change are all things that sort of potentially inform the way we think about things and the way we empathise with other people. So if you get upset, that will make me upset, and my physiology will reflect that.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah. But if I've had a traumatic brain injury, it may not.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Those things can get disconnected. Yeah.
So, in terms of your achievements, of which you have many, what would you consider to be your biggest achievement in your career?
I think really it was making that leap into social cognition, or even before that, pragmatics. And I said so when I was sort of trying to sort of unravel this conundrum, this ball of what's wrong with this social communication, and I met my PhD supervisor Peter Van Summers, and he'd reviewed a book on pragmatics, and I thought, I don't know what that is, but it sounds relevant.
Yes. Yeah.
So I read that book, and it opened the doors. I thought, okay, now here's a theoretical approach, and it's going to give me some answers, or some ways to find some answers.
And in terms of your success in your career, what do you think has made you successful?
Persistence, I think. I think that you just got to persist, and one thing I think we have to learn in academia is to cope with rejection.
Yes.
Endless rejections. I remember the very first journal article that you get rejected and you spend a very long time sobbing.
Yes.
I remember talking to Max Coltart about that, and he said he cried too. So I'm not the only person, but you'd feel so rejected, but you have to pick yourself up and go again. And I think it's just, that's what a research career is about. It's sort of, it's tough, and your work has to be very good quality to be accepted by your peers, and it's a tough road, but if you persist, you will get there.